I man forward on a different scene. I man Cali weed. I man queen. Everything was Irish. Getting in the groove. I just come down to movement. And someone said, don't move. Well, it must be a dopey Aragon man. I man not find out yet. And I so frightened. All the data name I forget. A dopey Aragon man. I never stop to sleep. Worry was a boy to I man.
Different vibes today.
Him couldn't follow. Him couldn't follow. Him couldn't follow.
Hey, what's up, Andrea?
Next day the daughter asked me, what happened to you last night?
Different vibes today.
When you're ready to work your show, you get stage fright. It was a dread from across the gully, just passing through. Decide to run a little joke, it wouldn't trouble you. Well, it must be a dopey Aragon man. I might not find out yet. I and I so frightened. All the talk and name I forget. Well, it must
Yes, deep in it. Yes, deep in it.
I never stopped to speak.
Welcome to What I Go On. Today we start with the sounds of Ernest Smith. Hey, what's up, Miss Pansy? Yes, Ben, greetings, greetings. Back in time with this one.
One thing I learned for certain, spread it round the town. No make no sense, you start to run before your foot touch the ground. Well, I know say out they well bitter, me know say out they well dread. Nobody get a failure, nobody lose your head. Well, it must be a dopey Aragon man. I man no find out yet. I and I so frightened. All the dark name I forget.
Hey, what's up, Lil?
Must be a dopey Aragon.
Hey, what's a real brother-in-law?
I never stopped to see. For it was a boy to I man last night.
Way back in time with this one.
I and I man forward on a different scene.
Greetings, greetings, greetings. All right. Pause there, Ernest Smith. Greetings, greetings. Welcome to What I Go On. Nice Friday evening here in Calgary. My name is Donovan Simon. I'm the president for the Jamaican Canadian Association Alberta, based in Calgary. And What I Go On is our way of connecting to the community, talking about things that are happening in our association, in our city, in our country, in Jamaica, in the world. And April is talking about taboo topics. Tonight, we're going to do another one. We're going to talk about death and grief, a part of life, a reality that we all have to face, right? And I have some great guests in the wings to come and talk to us about those topics. But of course, before we get into that discussion, we have to do some of the staples of What I Go On. One of which is the patois word of the day. And the patois word for today is guzum. So let's see the experts. Guzum. And if you were in Jamaica and using the patois, you'd possibly say something like, if him go and trouble me, I go guzum him. I'm going to get some guzum for him. So for those who understand the Jamaican patois, please ensure that you join the conversation and put the meaning in the comment section so people can relate to it. Patois word of the day is guzum. Clarence, big up yourself, right? Guzum. Uh, Before we get into what's coming up, I want to salute all our volunteers. This week is National Volunteer Week. Who knew? And we want to call out all the people who volunteer their time and resources, expertise to make associations and organizations like ours and others operate. You know, these people make things happen, and I want to big up all of the volunteers, whether you're a member of our association or wherever you volunteer your time, right? It says, you know, the value of one, the power of many. We keep doing it because it's important to do. Things that are coming up. Tomorrow, we're going to have another of our monthly meetings. It's going to start at 7 o'clock. It's on Zoom. It's open to the public. The Zoom information is on our website. It's on our social media. Jump on. There are a number of things that we want to discuss. And we also want to call out the next Getting Your Affairs in Order webinar. It's coming up on the 29th, and it's actually quite ideal that we're talking about death and grief tonight. The Getting Your Affairs in Order webinar helps you to bring into focus some of these things that you need to prepare for, including death. And we invite you to jump on their social media. So whether it's Instagram, look for Getting Your Affairs in Order, or on Facebook, and register for this free webinar that provides you with some really useful information because all of us going to have to walk through that door, the door of death. Uh, we're always talking about our Helping Hands program. We're still looking for support. Michael Pierson is going to be with us tonight. We want to big up Pierson's Funeral Services. They're one of those who already has jumped on to support us. We soon start talking more about them and all the others who have supported our Helping Hands program. There are a number of different categories. You'll get your logo on our website. You'll get your decal on the wall. You'll get social media features, lots of different things that are coming up as it relates to the Helping Hands program as we get our building ready for full use. One of the things that we've been calling out, and I really, this one is very, very close to my heart, is the library. We have a resource room. We want to have the single largest collection of Jamaican and Afro-Caribbean books in Canada. Ambitious goal, I know, and we're seeking your support. So if you've got a book this week, I think we collected about 20 books just yesterday, right? Somebody just say, hey, I've got books like those. I will donate them to your space. As you can see, the shelves are empty, or almost empty. So help us. If you've got some Jamaican authors, Caribbean authors, Afro-Caribbean, send them over to us, make a donation as we grow this resource. To get in touch with us, there are a number of different ways. You can jump on our website. You can send us an email. You can make a phone call. You can find us on social media. There are a number of different ways to connect with us. And we are open to hearing your feedback, hearing your ideas, working along with you. There are a couple of partnerships that right now we're working on, and we look forward to doing more. So yeah, that's the intro. And for those who are just joining, Patois word of the day is guzum, right? Enough people know the guzum thing, right? And if somebody trouble you, you go and you do a little thing and you make sure you guzum them, right? That's a patois. That's a patois word of the day. And Jamaicans love patois. All the non-Jamaicans love patois as well. It's just a beautiful language, very creative. However, today we're not gonna deal with the guzums thing so much. We're gonna talk about death and grief, another taboo topic. You know, in April we've been, going into them because these are things that we need to talk about as a community. And as I was preparing for the show, right, one of the things that I jumped and looked at was what some of the things that happen when we discuss grief, when we discuss death. And there are a couple of topics or some pointers that came out, and we're going to jump into those a little bit more, but I thought I'd share them, right? And maybe the first one is big. Grief is normal, right? Uh, Lots of different things about grief, but grief is normal, right? And grief doesn't necessarily happen just because somebody dies either, right? Grief comes in all kind of forms. I remember many years ago, I chopped down a tree, and my kids were so devastated. They couldn't believe that I would have sanctioned the chopping down of a tree, right? And I'm going to say that they grieved for the tree. People grieve for the loss of a pet. People grieve for all kinds of different things. And the other thing is this statement that I found. And as we get into the discussion, I want to maybe use this to pivot where we start. That many people plan for all kinds of things. As for some people, the future is so sure. Them plan for weddings and graduation and vacation. And some people can tell you 5 years ahead where they're going to go and how far down their bucket list that they're going to get. But for something that is certain to happen, their funeral, there's so many people that don't do any planning at all for it. In fact, some people pretend that it's not going to happen, so they ignore the reality. And on that note, I'm going to invite my guests on screen with me. Uh, Michael from Pierson's Funeral Services here in Calgary, and Bev Benskin, who's a grief counselor, Bayesian, but she's talking to us out of Texas, right? Michael and Bev, welcome to Wataguan.
Great to be here. Thanks.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
All right. So even though I know both of you don't have Jamaican heritage, do you have any clue what Guzum might be?
No.
I
Absolutely
have
not.
no clue.
All right. Well,
Is it food? It didn't sound like food when you were talking about it.
it could show up in food, Michael. Let's put it that way. Right, it could show up in food. We have a serious topic to talk about, death and grief, a reality that we all face. But oftentimes we don't talk about it. We skip around it, and when it hits us, sometimes it hits us harder than others. Michael, I'm going to start with you because you've been in the business for a long time. Like you say, you're seasoned. And maybe we'll start with a fun part of it. Are there any interesting stories, especially for the Jamaicans? Have any Jamaicans ever worked in your space? Because there are a lot of dead bodies that come through your business, right?
There are, as I was reflecting on Pierson's Funeral Home and our connection to the Jamaican community, it goes back 30 years. And it's, I almost don't want to tell a story because the first funeral that I really seriously remember in the Jamaican community was a tragedy where 10 members of one family passed away in the Jamaican community. And we held a funeral and they weren't even in Calgary. So we brought them back, 9 of them to Calgary, and had a funeral for 9 people. And it was a powerful, powerful experience. And that was our first real solid connection to the community. And that was back in the early 1990s.
Yeah. And I mean, like I said to you, I remember we used to have Pearsons come to our meetings and present and have those conversations. But it's a reality. It happens all the time. People are dying every day. I was looking at a stat, and it's like, every minute, hundreds of thousands of people all across the world are passing away. And Bev, let me bring you into the conversation early. Is why do we avoid talking about it? Why does it seem such a tough thing to just have a conversation about?
I think fear. I think it's fear, and I think we don't want to die. And so a lot of times we feel like if we talk about it, then something's going to happen to us. And so that's actually how I became a grief counselor, because I was scared of death. And the Lord works in mysterious ways. So
let's talk about this whole issue of grief then, right? Help those who are watching to understand what it is, because it's not just the big bawling that occurs when somebody dies, right? What is grief, and how do we prepare for it?
Well, grief, it's the feelings that come with the loss, the emotions, the sadness, the depression, the anger. And there's a million books on grief out there, but your grief is your unique grief. Some books might help, some books won't, because your experience is your own unique, just like your fingerprint. That's your grief experience. So we're not all going to grieve the same way. And I feel that we get lost in the not wanting to look weak. We get lost in if I show this, I'm going to feel like I'm weak. And it really has nothing to do with weakness. It's just a part of You grieve after you lose, after you have a loss. You grieve when you get divorced. You grieve when someone dies. You grieve when you lose a job. But we don't really know how to term it. We don't know what it is. A lot of people don't understand that's what's happening to them. So they just end up being angry, or oh, he's crazy, or she's crazy, or they're just angry. But really, it's grief. It's grief, and they don't know how to work through it because we haven't been taught. We really
Right.
haven't been taught.
And I'm going to come back to that in a little, because I want to talk about culture and grief. Because in Jamaica, where I'm from, you've got some people who seem to grieve very loudly and very boisterously, while there are other people who don't, right? But Michael, I'm sure you see this grief in different forms. But in dealing with the grief, there's also the reality of there are a lot of actions that are required because somebody just died. So maybe help us through that process when somebody walks into your business, because I mean, they don't just come there for casual visits, right?
No, and walking through our doors is a really hard thing. And one of the things about that's crazy about grief is it's sad. It's a down emotion, and my friends in the Jamaican community, that's not who they are. They're upbeat and happy and joyful and positive. And so to experience something that's a real downer is a difficult thing to do. And of course, walking through those doors, um, that's one of the first ways to acknowledge that the loss has happened. And sometimes they'll make a phone call first, and they'll just tell you that this is what's happened, and from there, I need your help. And of course, it depends on what kind of death it's been. If it's many deaths are expected. My dad passed away in January. He was 93. This was not a big surprise to us, and he would been quite ill. It's a little bit different than something that comes out of left field that's sudden and unexpected, like the tragedy I'd mentioned earlier. So I think depending on the type of situation it is, that's, the grief will be a little bit different well, it'll be very, very different in each one. Just like Bev said, that grief is different for everyone else. Grief is going to be different depending on the circumstances and the person it is in your life.
Yeah. And Bev, so based on these differences, like I said, culturally, right? Uh, how do you help people through that? What are some of the techniques? What are some of the things that you try to, especially like a family, for example, that you try to get them to understand as they go through that process?
I think for me as a therapist, I've been an ICU nurse for 30 years, and I've been a therapist for 10 years. And so I feel like I've learned that they come to me as an expert, but they're an expert in their own grief because I don't know what your life was like with that person. So I try to respect that culture. I try to respect whatever culture I'm working with and ask them, what do you need? Because what I want to help them with, they may not need that. They may have had a broken relationship, and they're not necessarily wanting to talk to me about the sadness of the loss, but their last words to that person, and how do they live with that. So I have to you always have to be listening to what people need. If the relationship's broken, it's going to be a different kind of grief than if you had the chance to lay in the bed with your loved one and say goodbye. It's so we have to always be aware that it's not just textbook grief. It's what do you need in this particular situation? And also remembering, just because you're in the same family doesn't mean you're going to grieve the same. You're not going to cry the same. You're not going to have the same feelings because you had a specific relationship with that loved one.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's true. Because like I tell you, I know some people, and in Jamaica, we say them ball for everybody, right?
Right,
There's some professional grievers,
right,
they show up at any funeral and cry.
right, right. And that's true. That's true.
And they're good at it.
I
Yeah.
tell you, they're really good. Uh, I'm going to come back to culture a little bit, but Michael, let's talk about costs and expenses and things that people don't plan for when it comes to death, right? Talk us through that process a little bit, because I think some people think you just buy a little jar, or get a box and that's all there is to it. I'm sure there's more to it, right?
Oh, there's a lot to it. And it's always interesting, especially when you talk about specific cultures. And we're talking here about the Jamaican culture tonight, but there's a lot of similarities between every culture. And I think that the Jamaican community in some ways is not that different than any other community. A lot of other communities don't like to talk about death, and they don't like to face it. And they don't like the fact that it costs money. And you know what? The dying part is free. You get that for free. It's everything else that costs money.
Mhm.
And so, for a funeral home like ourselves, and there are others out there, we have to be ready to jump into action 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, ready to answer the call and ready to respond when the need happens. And so it starts there. And then there's a lot of work we do. If a family wants a viewing, we'll need to embalm the body. We need to have a place to keep the body until we plan the funeral. We've got to meet with the family. We've got to do the work around it. And we've got to host the funeral. We've got to have expensive cars to drive it around. We've got to have people to usher, and we have to print the programs. So there's a lot involved. And a lot of that, a lot of the cost is going to depend on what the family chooses. So there are expensive funerals and there are less expensive funerals, like way less expensive funerals. And it really depends on what the families are. And you can get a cremation for less, around $2,000, but that's usually when the rubber hits the road, people want more than that. And if they're going to honor their loved one, all of a sudden it's more important than that.
Yeah.
So when it comes to cost, it's like anything, we all need to save for a rainy day, and none of us really like to be prepared for stuff that might go wrong, or stuff that's, really, who wants to save for a funeral? I want to save for a new bike. I want to save for a trip. I want to save for all of those other things, but we all know it's going to happen.
Yeah, but it's not the irony of it, because in Jamaican culture, there's some people who think that the last rites and the last celebration must be huge. In some cases, the funerals are bigger than the weddings, right? People get buried in gold caskets, and they have to have chariots and all the rest of that comes into that process, even though they didn't necessarily plan for it, right? So maybe one of the things, and I'm going to throw it to both of you, is this whole planning process, right? So Bev, help us understand, what are some of the things that people should be considering and planning through in order to manage the inevitable?
Well, I could only give a personal story. My mom passed away, which we were very close, a few years ago. Suddenly she got sick, and then she was in a coma, and then she passed away. And when she passed away, the one thing that stuck out for my dad, my brothers, and myself was that they had pre-planned. They had pre-planned. I was devastated. I'm the only girl. My brothers were kind of lost. My dad was devastated. So we didn't really want to we didn't want to do all that. We just didn't want to do all that. But my mom had said a long time ago, look in the box. There's always something in the box. I'm like, I don't want to hear about the box. I don't want to talk about it. But I went to the box, and the papers were yellow. And I remember calling saying, they're probably closed. And when I called, they said, nope, they bought this in 1980, and it covers everything. So when we went, we just basically had to pick out a few things. I think we wanted a portrait of her painted. And we did that, and everything was done. And they had put the price up. I think my parents spent like $800 back in 1980, and it would have been 10,000 or 20,000. I can't remember the price, but they did a price comparison for the prepaid. And so I just tell people all the time that was such a blessing for the kids and my dad, because we didn't have to worry about that. And it helps in the grieving process, because we're not bickering and fighting. She picked out all her own things. So we didn't have to fight about what color what is that? It was done. So anybody who's listening right now, it is a blessing to your family when they don't have to worry about any of that.
Yeah. Even though, like some people say, but I'm dead. I'm not worried. I leave
Yeah.
it to them, right?
But it's the after effect. And it does assist with the grieving process because you don't have all this other stuff, all the fighting and all the bickering and all the things that come along with that. So you don't have to grieve that as well or stop speaking. People stop speaking. People, they say weddings and funerals, it brings out the worst in people. So
And the best.
yes, and the best,
And
and
the
the
best, but it also, you're right, it does bring out the worst.
yes, it
Yeah.
does.
But doesn't this whole pre-planning make your job easier as well, Michael?
It actually, it doesn't always make it easier because you can, had your mother planned back in 1980 and she lived for 30 years. Oftentimes every year we'll get a little visit and have to change things and update them and whatever. So it's more work for us, but we don't mind that at all because it's great to be able to sit down with the family and share, look what your parents have done. Isn't this a gift to you and your family that they made these decisions for you? Because you're absolutely right. Not everyone will agree as to what should happen and what the choices should be. And it's just a wonderful gift when families can do that in advance. And,
Yeah.
and we love being able to have that done. Way more easy to sit face to face with someone when a death has not occurred
Right.
and they're still alive
Mhm.
than when a death has occurred. All of a sudden it changes the dynamics of the conversation and it's a little harder.
Yeah. And especially with the heightened emotion, all kinds of things go haywire. You
Right.
know, other people will be angry. And Michael, I want to continue a point with you because I think we talked about I mentioned cremation earlier. Uh, Culturally, a lot of people don't understand it. Love my dad. My dad's 88, and I remember saying to him, I think I'm going to make the choice to be cremated when I pass away as part of my whole pre-planning. And I'm like, no, we don't do those things. Uh, not in our culture. Talk to us a little bit about cremation, what it's all about, and things that maybe people don't understand about, managing death and the whole cremation process.
Great question, and I'm glad you brought it up. A lot of people imagine that cremation means that's all you do. The body gets picked up and it goes to the crematorium and nothing else happens. And actually, cremation is just, instead of getting to the end and burying the body, you get to the end and cremate the body. So you could do all of the same things you do for a burial for a cremation. You can still have an open casket. You can still have a viewing. You can still have a religious service, and you can still have music and an obituary and talks and flowers and all of those things. And so, oftentimes it gets back to the question of, and I hear people, this would be my mother. Oh, all I want is just don't do anything for me when I die. I don't need to do anything for me when I die. And actually, Mom, when you're gone, it's not going to be about you anymore. It's going to be about what we need and what I need. And so that's what's oftentimes more important. So the question about cremation, certainly we can cremate the body when everything is said and done, but it might still be important for the family to have a viewing. It might be important for the family to have a lot of those other rituals and traditions that are part of it, that are really healing, that really help process the grief and kind of anchor those important memories that you have about mom or dad or whoever it is. And so, and the thing is once the cremation's done, you now have cremated remains and you need to do something with them. So you can take them to the cemetery and bury them, and you can still have a headstone and you can still have a place to go. So just saying you want cremation doesn't paint the whole picture. It just paints one little tiny bit of it. And it still leaves lots and lots of other things that need to be opened. So one of the questions is, it goes a lot further than, okay, well, what else do you want? If you want to be cremated, what are your other wishes? Because it goes far beyond just the choice of being burnt or being buried.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's great detail. And I want to stretch it a little bit and bring Bevan on it, because one of the things that comes with grief and death is this concept of closure, right? And everybody wants closure in different ways. You know, I remember many, many years ago, when my grandmother died. One of her sons just wanted to see her one last time at the graveside. Right? Let's talk a little bit about closure and what that looks like and what it means for people, and how us as a community, as individuals, should understand it so we can respect each other's need for closure.
I think closure, the word closure probably isn't the correct word because it means closed, like we're done. And if you love someone, you're never really done grieving. You learn how to live with it. You learn how to walk side by side with it. And so um I think a lot of times we think, oh, it's been 2 years and you're still crying or you're still talking about your mother, like get over it. And it's like, no, I only have one mother and I'm going to talk about her till probably I die. So we have to just not think of it. I call it reconciliation, reconciling with the loss, but you're not over it. You're not, there's no closure, but it's not as intense. The feelings aren't as acute as when they first pass away. It's usually like, you kind of adjust to it. You adjust to it. But I could easily cry if somebody brought something up right now. I could easily cry, but I'm not because I don't feel like it. But I could, and it's been a few years. So we have to give people grace. We have to be patient with people, and I do find the people that comment the most on getting over it haven't. I always say they haven't even lost a Tic Tac in their purse and they have all these, all these thoughts about what I should be feeling or anybody else. So you have to kind of look at the source of who's giving you the advice as well.
Yeah. All right.
Can I jump in a little bit here? I hear the word closure as well. And part of me, I always think about closing the casket, and that's the closure. And it's not the right thing. It's because there are so many different emotional points that you go through, and one of them might be making the phone call to the funeral home, or the initial discovery that a death has occurred, and then actually having to tell somebody else about it, and then choosing a casket, and then seeing the person when they're deceased, and then the talks at the funeral, and hearing the stories. And then it might be actually at the grave when the casket goes down into the grave. These are all really emotional parts. And I think that if you're going to use the word closure, and I'm with you, Bev, I don't care for that word. You can have these moments that you can walk through that make a big difference and move you forward. And when you can do that surrounded by people and in practicing those rituals that are kind of important to you, then it will do a lot to help process the grief, which is really probably what it's more about rather than closing something up.
Yeah.
Right.
For the last year, there has been a little thing called COVID-19. And many of these rituals and things that were so sacred to many cultures have been shifted, distorted, removed, amended, adjusted, all kinds of things. Both of you, I'm sure, have experienced it. Let's talk a little bit about that, how COVID-19 has changed the landscape of us dealing with death and grief. Michael, maybe let's start with you on this, because the funeral, for example, like I know in Jamaica now they have curfews just for funerals because, funeral is a big thing in Jamaica. You don't even have to know who it is. You just hear that a funeral is keeping and it's full. And everybody wanted to go to the cemetery. And I was talking to my father the other day. One of my aunt passed away a couple of months ago. And I'm like, but Daddy, I hear there's only 20 people who are supposed to be at the funeral. He said, well, you can't control it. People want to come. Right. So let's talk a little bit about some of the changes and how people have had to respond.
Well, I think the first thing to recognize and acknowledge, just like a lot of different types of grief, is the grief has been more intense this year. And why is that? I think there's a number of reasons why it's been more intense. And part of it is we haven't been able to have all of the same support that we've normally had when we've experienced a loss. And so and it's been a hard year. Let's put it out there. It's been hard. I can tell you that. But it's also been, we've been able to help people get through their grief in spite of the challenges. And I think of this, similar things have been true with wartime and other challenges when awful, tragic things have happened in the world. Specifically, you talked about it right off the bat, is we have restrictions in numbers in terms of, we don't want to spread this thing around. So they told us you can't travel, you can't have big gatherings, you can't hug somebody, all of those things are difficult. So we've, the beauty is that we've been able to find ways of accommodating grief in unconventional ways. We had a drive-by viewing, and people we had a casket open in a church parking lot, and people drove by and paid attention to and were able to kind of somehow process their grief with the family. And it was, they really liked the fact that actually Dad loved cars and he was a car salesman. This makes sense. And so it was kind of oddly healing for that family. We've been able to have meetings like we're doing now, where we've been able to learn to broadcast funerals. And that's actually allowed a lot more people to participate than perhaps would have in other times. It's given us a new technology to share. And it's been hard to learn how to do that. But it's made a significant difference where people have been able to at least express grief in this way. May not be exactly perfect, but it's helpful, and it's still helpful.
Bev, what's been your experience with this whole COVID-19 thing and this grief management process?
I think working in the ICU, I work with sick babies. So just the visitation, if a baby passes away, we only have one parent visiting. And so it's kind of like, that's not normal. Everybody should be able to be at the bedside when somebody's passing away. So before they even get to the funeral home, they've had all these losses. They couldn't say goodbye to grandma. They couldn't say goodbye to their loved one the way they normally would, because we only have one visitor in the hospital at a time. So the grief starts way, way back, anticipatory grief, before even the loss, because they're grieving all the things the losses that have come about because of COVID-19. So it's something they have to process after the funeral. They have to process not just the death, but what did I lose by not being able to say goodbye? What did I lose by not going to the hospital because I couldn't? What did I lose? So there's just a lot of losses that come along with the actual death.
Yeah. Is it going to change the landscape in your view going forward? Again, I'm going to use Jamaican culture. I was talking to somebody yesterday and I'm saying one thing I know it does is save on a lot of money for food.
I think COVID-19 actually has also helped people to realize how important their families are to them. I think they've realized how they have to kind of make it intentional to go and communicate with their families, because tomorrow's not guaranteed anymore. And so we have to kind of learn to live with this new normal, the new way of doing funerals, the new way of coping with grief. We have to be intentional with our healing. We have to be intentional with our grief, which means you have to actively grieve. You can't pretend, you can't act like everything's okay. The key to healing and walking through healing is acknowledgement of your pain. You have to say, I hurt. And so until you do that, you can't start the healing process. And it's kind of like if you have a cut, you don't expect the cut to just seal up at the top. It has to heal from the inside out. If you just seal it up at the top and you say, I'm okay, the funeral's over, I'm doing good, then the wound is festering under there. It's dirty, it needs to be cleaned out. And so you have to allow the grief and it hurts. And you're going to end up with a scar. It's not always going to hurt, but you're going to end up with a scar. And that shows, yes, I've been through something, but I also made it through it.
Yeah, yeah.
Donovan, can I answer your question here?
Sure.
First of all, I hope that we return to something that's normal, just like vacations and eating out and visiting. I think we're going to return to that. I've always said the most important part of the funeral is the luncheon after. That to me is the most important part, because a lot of the heavy work is done and things are lighter, and having a meal with your family and your friends is really, it's really wonderfully healing, and it really gets
Yeah.
those who have suffered the most kind of back. That's the first event after the funeral, and
Yeah,
there's a little bit of normalcy in
hold
that.
on, Michael. That's because you're not in Jamaica. People are eating for 7 days before the funeral, and you have to feed them 3 times a day.
It's the emotional eating. I think we all could get caught in that emotional eating. So,
Right.
but we'll set the food aside for just a moment, and I think that live streaming funerals is here to stay.
Yes.
I don't think we're going backwards on that one. And I think there's lots of little things that are going to continue that we've learned to do that we should have been doing before that we weren't. And so I'd like to think that there are a few things that we've learned that we'll be able to keep doing going forward.
Yeah, I tend to think so, that just like in all the other areas of life, that we have been forced to make adjustments, and some of the things that previously we never considered, we have found a way to make acceptable and normal, right? Uh, One point I want to make sure that I get on before we wrap up, Michael, maybe this one is for you, is this whole cultural practice of repatriation. I'm sure COVID-19 has affected it. Talk to us a little bit about that, and explain what it's all about. I was thinking yesterday as I prepared, and I'm like, geez, it's very likely there's a body in the hood of the airplane that I am on causing some turbulence.
Well, there's first of all, Donovan, not everybody understands the word repatriation.
Right.
And repatriation just means essentially it's going back to the mother country, going back to the homeland. And in this case, when we're talking about someone who's passed away, it's getting the body back to, in this case, Jamaica. And so it's something we're familiar with. We know how to do that. We can make it happen. And COVID has moved the goalposts like it has with everything else, and made it a little bit more difficult, but it can still happen. I want to share a story. We have a family where the death has occurred here in Calgary, and we're waiting to, and we've had all of the documents ready now for about 3 weeks to ship somebody back to, I believe it's Eritrea in Africa. And we can't get the flights on the airlines. And we're going to actually deliver the body to the airport yesterday, and it's been bumped another 2.5 weeks. And it's out of our hands. With the number of flights that have been reduced around the world, and with all of the challenges that that's causing, just making this work is problematic, and doesn't mean it's not going to happen. It just means that it's tougher.
So
I don't know, what else do you want me to tell you about repatriation?
So no, I just want to make sure that people understand. So even the corpse can go on standby.
We're using air cargo, so we're not doing the passenger flight. So standby is not an option. So I wish we could use standby.
They're not upstairs. All right, we're going to wrap it up by talking a little bit about this whole issue of culture and getting this conversation happening. And Bev, you're on the counseling side. What's the advice that you give to families? The advice that you're giving to the people that are watching this, to say, okay, if there's one thing you take away from this conversation today, here's a nugget. Like, what do you want to say to a couple of them?
I think to listen to what people need. I think we always assume that we know what somebody needs, but we don't take the time to ask. And so it's very basic, but if I ask you, do you want this? And they're like, no, that's not what I want. What do you want? And then it will help you to understand what they're going through. When somebody dies and somebody brings you a meal and you have 400 casseroles, I don't need that. I need somebody to mow my lawn. But you didn't ask me. You just brought me food, and you talked about bringing me food, and you told everybody you brought me food, but you didn't help me. So it's asking, what do you need? What do you need in this specific situation on this particular day? Or pick something and say, hey, I'm going to do this for you for the next couple of weeks. I'm going to get your groceries. I'm going to listen to you. Just call me anytime. I'm going to listen to you in the middle of the night, just for, whatever you need. And so people appreciate that more than just picking the thing that you want to do and doing that.
All right, that's a good one. Michael, you know so much about the death industry, and people aren't going to remember everything that you said today. But what are some of the nuggets that you'd really want them to at least walk away with from this conversation?
One of the things I think that's important, and this goes for everybody in any culture, is as kids, we grow up and we look at our adults and roll our eyes at what they do and wonder, what, this is crazy. My culture's weird. And as you grow up, sometimes you realize that the traditions in your culture actually have a lot of meaning and a lot of importance. And then they become your own and you hang on to them. And of course, every generation will change the traditions a little bit, but there's still traditions. So hold fast to some of those traditions. Don't throw them out just because we're in a new generation. Look seriously about why they're there. And so that would be one thing. And I think that the other thing is that it's you can't do it on your own. We are social creatures, and grieving, you're going to have your private times, and that's important to have private times, but it's much easier when you have somebody helping you along in your grief. And sometimes that needs to be a big group, sometimes that needs to be a friend, sometimes it needs to be a family member. And just realize that it's important. We are social by nature, and that's probably the most important thing you can do, is contact someone like Bev, who can help you walk through this, and or go to a grief group, or go back to your church, or go back to your family, or go back to your best friend. But you can't do it on your own.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I don't have a producer to throw the information in our link, but Bev, I'll make sure that we throw it up so that people can see it. And Michael will definitely be saying more about Pierson's Funeral Services in a little bit. Bev and Michael, this has been an awesome conversation. Thank you both for being on Wataguan, even though you don't know what bosom is.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's been a real honor. I appreciate all your questions and guiding us through this, because it's not an easy topic. Great job, Donovan.
All right, awesome. All right, take care, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, another taboo topic, and we have discussed it: death and grief, a reality of life. Hopefully you take away something from this. And I really want to, I saw a couple of questions pop up. For the people who have not gone on the Getting Your Affairs in Order webinar, there's one coming up. Check it out. Check it out. I went to the seminar a few times because, hey, I want to get this information. But there's so much information that we get that we need to have, right? The other thing is that death is not partial, just like COVID, right? It jumps on whoever it wants to jump on whenever it chooses to, right? So let's ensure that we prepare for it. We're going to close out April next week on Wataguan with one more taboo topic. We're going to talk about suicide. It's all in our heads. It's happening in our community. And we're going to take it out and talk about it. Where is it happening? Why is it happening? What are some of the things that we should look for? Because who knows? It might happen in your space. And chances are, if you knew about it, or if you knew what to do, you might have done something to divert that person, right? So next week, same time, same place, 7 p.m. here, we're going to take on that topic. And then we're going into May. Yeah, you can imagine 2021, we're in May. And we're going to take on social topics. And we are going to talk on the 7th with a Black candidate here in Calgary running for mayor. So we're going to have Teddy on the show running for mayor. We're going to see, is Calgary ready for a Black mayor? Join us for that. As always, we ask you to jump on our social media, follow us, like us, share, so that others can benefit from these discussions, right? COVID is still around, folks. In fact, the numbers seem to be going up, and all the new strains. I'm surprised there's not a Jamaican strain yet, right? Because the Jamaican thing, we love not everything, right? But stay safe, stay safe, please, right? Take care of each other. Until next time, walk good. We end with Ernest Smith again, right? Let's play it. Walk good.
And I'm on forward on a different scene. I and I man Cali weed. I and I man Queen. Everything was Irish. Getting in the groove. I just come down to movement when someone said, don't move. Well, it must be a dopey or a gunman. I might not find out yet. I and I so frightened. All the data name I forget. Well, it must be a dopey or a gunman. I never stopped to sleep. Quarry was a boy to I man last night. He couldn't follow, he couldn't follow, he couldn't follow me. Next day the daughter asked me, what happened to you last night? Just when you're ready to work your show, you get stage fright. It was a dread from across the gully, just passing through.